Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. The date is February 5th, 2026. It is also February Heart Health Awareness Month. That being said, I'm wearing my red. I hope out there you listeners and viewers are doing the same in your own way. But at the same time, I'm here to reflect on the legacy of Frank About Health. Why? Because Frank About Health, being transparent about the truth of our healthcare needs is never more critical than it has been in the last several months due to the one big beautiful bill being signed into law in July of 2025. Now, you have seen me come on the show with Anshar Seraphim, who is my guest today. He was here around sometime, I believe, in October, as we were discussing about his life with autism spectrum disorder and sensory deprivation disorder and how he's been a disruptor, but he has manifested a very successful way of looking at the world through technology, through cognitive behavioral thinking. I'm going to let him really outline his whole story in the second segment of the show. But he is definitely an anomaly, but also a role model for any of the people in the neurodivergent community and for anyone like myself, a podcaster trying to advocate for truth and real information that we all need, especially since in my view, I don't feel our government is looking after our healthcare the way they used to or the way that they need to. They looked after it much more so during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was actually the launch, or the relaunch, I should say, of Frank About Health back in 2021. So today's episode, I don't know if it really requires a disclaimer because I'm going to be giving information that if you disagree with, then change the channel or watch something else. The point is if you are looking for information about your healthcare, mental, physical, neurological, nutrition, cancer care, diabetes, the list goes on, listen for the next hour because you're going to get a lot of information, resources, and avenues to search through after the show is over. All right. So I guess that would be my disclaimer. That being said, let me just give you my personal view as to why I launched Frank About Health. I wanted to be frank about, first, epilepsy, something I've lived most of my life with, but I've learned to live successfully with it, especially after the last 25 years. Second, I wanted to combat all of the misinformation that was going on during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here in New York State, our governor at the time, Andrew Cuomo, had completely shut down the city for about 5 months, and I had seen a community at large fighting tooth and nail to get everybody to do what they can to preserve their lives, keeping 6 foot distant, wearing masks, taking the vaccines when they were available, doing the PCR test before flying on a plane. And again, the list went on. Then I was also dealing with circumstances in my own family's life, a father recovering from prostate cancer, a cousin with debilitating Alzheimer's disease that was in progressive stages, while she also underwent different eye surgeries for potential diabetic retinopathy. And then also, I became a caregiver professionally under the state of New York guidelines during 2023, 4, and 5. And then when our certain president got elected, those rights were taken away from me. So I became not only an advocate, I became a caregiver. I became someone who knew that every time I was seeing misinformation about healthcare, I would have my enraged response and I would turn it into an episode. And I was fortunate enough to meet the right people. Everyone knows Phyllis Quinlan, who was my co-host for about 40 episodes. And we were able to really bring out a lot of awareness about the nurses, about caregivers, about burnout. She was also there for me when Retha Gray had passed last year, and she was also there for me when I introduced everyone to Dr. Marshall Runji, and we talked about the disruption that was going on in our healthcare system, the disruption both technologically and in a good way, but politically in a bad way where funding got cut, as well as all of the possibilities for cures for cancer, cures for HIV/AIDS, cures for diabetes were now a longer way away because it really took upon us, the individuals that are living with chronic care issues or with living with a lot of challenges as a caregiver to go and build and create different fundraising campaigns, different solutions that we could do. and I was in the middle of one with Hilton Hotels. That being said, I created a documentary along with the engineering team of talkradio.nyc. And of course, a shout out there to um, Jessica Sarivan, to Emily Schulman, and of course to Sam Leibowitz, all giving me the resources of talkradio.nyc to be able to have a 1 hour and 20-minute documentary now available on YouTube so that we could create a whole advocacy platform for, at the time, Hilton Grand Vacations. Now, they're they are where they are, and everybody has a change in viewpoints, sometimes driven by the political wind of the time. However, it actually fueled my fire to create an entire company to allow it to sit along with my catalog of shows of Frank About Health in what I call an IP company, intellectual property company. I created that in April of 2025, and since then, I've been harvesting it to also take on other intellectual property in healthcare, especially in the areas of AI, as well as working with other caregiving programs that are launching and trying to also stick local, at least within the New York City or New York State area, for starters, so we can be the best example of what it's like to combat the continual disruption. In other words, we needed to focus on taking charge of our own health, whether it meant financially, politically, socially, or even through this existing platform. So I worked with my lawyers and I came up with a play on the words healthy and e-media. And I'll call it health e-media because all of the media that I present every week on talkradio.nyc is available on YouTube. It's available on LinkedIn. It's available on Facebook. It's available when streaming on Twitch. I stay away from those social media that have their own views that are more misrepresenting the truth. So that way I keep myself all localized and I continue to work with advocates. And the reason, again, why Anshar will definitely take over the next segment of the show is because he speaks the truth and then some. E to the X power is what I give him. That being said, you may all remember that between October and December of 2025, I had a lot of special guests on the show. Tom Ingenio. I had Todd Otten. I had Matthew Zachary. I also had Anshar, and I also had Dale Atkins, all of which are disruptors, all of which have gone on to their own advocacy platforms for 2026. As I mentioned, Dale Atkins was on the Today Show, and simultaneously, Matthew Zachary will be launching a concert at Lincoln Center in April to raise funding for cancer. Because I think when he was on the show, I think it was called Cancer Sucks or something like that. But the book in itself is really representative of what he's doing to really help our government get in line with refunding cancer care. A survivor of brain cancer. He had 6 months to live, and he's been here 20 years after that. All right. So when you fight for your health care with the right information, Health eMedia not only became a production arm for my documentary and a licensing arm for all of my IP, including Frank About Health, but it has become a movement. And I am proud to say, in all honesty, thanks to Anshar Seraphim, that movement has been elevating. And if it wasn't for him and with his brilliance and his knowledge, and especially in AI and in other areas of cognitive thinking and cognitive studies, um, I don't know where I would be, to be honest with you, because I've been going through caregiver burnout. So I will say it takes a village, it takes a community. I give a shout out again, thanks to Sam Leibowitz, because he introduced me to this community first in 2016 and then during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2021. And therefore, I'm continuing to fight with this platform to move forward into even better platforms that will expand what talkradio.nyc has offered, but at the same time will benefit everyone that has participated in this ecosystem. So I'm dedicating this episode pretty much to give a review of how I have created Healthy Media as an LLC, limited liability company, to help derive revenue and resources and access to healthcare that we are not getting what we used to get, but we are not getting enough of at this point in time. That is probably an 11-minute monologue from what I see. I don't think I've spoken that long before when introducing an episode of the show, but I just had to get this all out, partially because I was so sick last week that this episode had to be canceled so that I can replay the show that I did with Jeff Pearson and with Tom Ingenio, all on invisible illness. And yet, that in itself is an example of disruption and doing something about it. Neurodivergent people building their own product or service that helps others like them. That is the community that I have been fighting for all of this time. And so, for that reason alone, I think, Anshar, I'll let you talk before our first commercial break. I don't want to be doing a monologue when you're sitting right there. But tell me, everything I've told you, how has it impacted you, even in the few dealings that we've had together over the past several months?
Well, you said no disclaimers for you, but I'll give my standard disclaimers.
Sure.
I'm Anshar Seraphim. I teach applied behavioral psychology and applied cognitive neuroscience for business, sales, personal development, marketing, identifying target market demographics, coming up with design implementation, solving impossible problems. I'm a writer, but I do have to point out as a behaviorist that I'm not a clinician. I don't treat anyone. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. Nothing that I say should be misconstrued for any type of medical advice. If you're going to have any change of diet, exercise, or any other important aspects of your life, make sure you consult a physician. You did mention that I'm a role model, and that while I'm very flattered by that, I believe fervently that rather than idealize people, we should look at behaviors that we find inspiring. And if someone finds a particular behavior that I do inspiring in a way that informs the way that they live their life, I'm always flattered by that. There's a reason that I say never meet your heroes. And I think that's because, all people are inherently flawed and have their own issues and challenges. And I'm no different a human being than anyone else. Um, I have been flattered very with all of the great opportunity that once you sought my help and trying to make some great connections to be able to connect people with this campaign and kind of really dig into what are some of the things that are wrong that need to be addressed and what the best way is to do that. There's a lot of very inspiring changes that are coming around, not necessarily in the Western world. We do have a brand new social media platform, Upscrolled, that's around the corner. With already had, I think when I last looked at the news article in the first few days, just 2.5 million subscribers already, just because people are very hungry for an unbiased media source, but
Right.
also to avoid things like shadow banning and all of that sort of thing. So that with all of the contention over platforms like TikTok, that's exciting.
Mhm.
I made some mutual connections. I don't know if it'll pan out or not, but my hope is that by the end of the week, when Issam, the CEO of that particular company, comes back in country, I have a mutual connection that might be able to introduce us, so I might get a face to face with them. That's exciting. And then
Mhm.
if anyone's been watching the development with the new Qatar uh, web summit that they did for startups. They initially started with I think $1 billion with their initial investment, and that's been upped by another two. So they're $3 billion about to be injected in everything from human resources to LLM to SaaS to machine learning to ecological concerns and sustainability. Uh, there's a huge opportunity in not just the market, but also in all of the interpersonal interactions that we're going to need as a global community to be able to fight problems that affect everyone and give everything more visibility. I think there's a great opportunity there. I had the pleasure of just recently, speaking with someone who was trying to advocate for some of the sustainability goals that the UN has set, what we can do to increase some global parity and visibility with one another. So there's a lot of exciting developments, and maybe we'll get into talking about some of that or some of the other things that I'm doing. But all in
Yes.
all, there's a lot of stuff in today's stage to talk about.
So you are going to get in the next segment, because we're about to take our first commercial break, true health e-media, healthy with a Y, from Anshar Seraphim in segment two. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, and welcome back. Now we're going to get to the real stuff of what I view health e-media as a movement, and that is the structure and the right relationships and the right information that helps you monitor and advocate for your own health care. That being said, go ahead, Anshar. Talk about all of the opportunities that you are involved in over the next few months that people can learn from in terms of how they can get information about healthcare that might actually come from non-Western cultures, among other kinds of resources that most people are being distracted from even seeing right now based on traditional media.
Well, I mean, Dr. Tom obviously would be one of the best assets for that. I think one of the interesting things is that we do have a very ethnocentric view of medicine, especially with mental health. The APA has been a pretty large mainstay as far as psychology is concerned, and there's a reason for that. But there are all kinds of different systems of support, medical support, wellness that have been around for not just hundreds but thousands of years, including dialectics on things like existential crisis, finding I think go back to Aristotle, finding eudaimonia and Nicomachean ethics. What constitutes finding purpose. I think there's so many different aspects to holistic health, and whether that's being able to meet challenges like a diagnosis or get a new medical condition or supporting research. For instance, we have a lot of hustle and move right now around tetrahydrobiopterin BH4 and like DRD4 for genetic dopamine availability and some of the confounding variables for developmental disorders like autism and ADHD out there. A lot of research that needs to be done. I've actually posted some invitation, an open invitation for research on my LinkedIn with a full, like, an example experimental protocol to be able to address things like that. We also have our global health to worry about, things like ecological microplastics, what we're going to be doing about problems like heat dissipation, waste, and power when it comes to emergent technologies like AI. Really, we have a lot to talk about, and part of it, I think, is that we also need to talk about behavior, which is where I come in. There are some really simple things that we can do differently on a daily basis that can greatly affect our health. And while I can't speak from an angle of medical expertise, I would call attention to the fact that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in today's world. I think one of the examples I really like to use is that most people you could ask if you had a time machine and go back 50 years in the past, if there's anything you would change, and most people will answer that they would be afraid to change something because that whole butterfly, step on a butterfly, create a hurricane effect. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that means that you have a belief that small things matter, and yet the same people who believe that will believe that the little things that they do each day don't matter. That's an example of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Um, Education is also incredibly important inside of that. I've been privileged to work as a primary copywriter for the nonlinear think tank at the Octopus Movement. We're a collective of nonlinear and neurodivergent minds trying to apply our skills toward big global challenges. And just to call attention to a couple of basic things.
Mm-hmm.
One is that the Sumatran rainforest. I don't think most people think about it as consumers, but even if it was a perfectly healthy product, the U.S. reliance on palm oil, hydrogenated oil, um, that causes that immense demand for using it for everything from a shortening agent to using it in products like makeup, um, it's basically caused most of the local laws to change, because in order to keep up with that demand, they have to clear cut and burn rainforests, often with orangutans and Sumatran elephants and tigers still living inside of the forest that they're burning down. It's really horrible. And then on top of that, and I think this is where health comes in, that something as simple as that, as palm oils, when we put those into our food to try to increase shelf life, and we try to replace ingredients like butter, those sort of things in cooking, we actually do not have the same breakdown in our bodies to be able to rid ourselves of that as we would with another substance, as a period of time where it goes down. Again, I'm not speaking as a medical expert here, and that can lead to things like arteriosclerosis, congestive heart failure, heart disease, stroke, cancer. And I think when you look at the actuarial tables for the Western world, what are the three leading causes of death? You have heart disease, stroke,
Mm-hmm.
and cancer. But another thing that happens is where we choose to apply our efforts. Often we'll do things like, protest in front of a new, industrial plant or something like that. We see those smokestacks in our backyard. And it's funny to me because the US demand for palm oil and the deforestation of the rainforest, the Sumatra rainforest, actually has a larger impact on our carbon footprint than the entire US industrial complex.
Hmm.
And that's just a food choice. That's something that every single one of us could be thinking about when we're picking out products. Most of us don't realize when we're reaching for a container of non-dairy creamer that the whole thing is basically made out of those kinds of products. So whether or not we're aware of that, whether that's from an ecological standpoint or a health standpoint, and again, I would encourage people to take a look at some people who have the right authority to speak on medical topics when it comes to things like nutrition, what we're putting in our food, how it impacts us. Um,
Right.
but those small choices can make a big difference. And then we have that big divide when we start getting into how the Western world chooses to handle things like healthcare. I think it's easy for us to forget that as little as 100, 150 years ago, we were throwing people into sanitariums for, made up ideas like, being hysterical. Uh, there's a lot of social commentary there. Whether you get into Michel Foucault and talk about madness and civilization, or we start having a bigger kind of dialectic on important topics like mental health, and then of course being neurodivergent has affected me in my life, seeing the way that neurodivergent people have blocked access to employment, but also to the right support. Just speaking from my own perspective, I'm literally getting treated at a doctor's office, for my autism and all of that. And I sent them an ADA request because of my sensory processing disorder, letting them know that, I'm not able to do phone calls. Because I
Yeah.
wasn't even able to get my driver's license until I was 37 because of my sensory issues. And their response to me sending that to them was to call me to talk to me about it. So
Oh
obviously we have
God.
some gaps that we've got to think about, and there's also some really important personal care, like some of the things that you touched on. Um, what happens when an elderly person needs support in their home? And maybe they don't want to go live in an extended care facility.
Yeah.
And being able to come up with solutions like that, I think one of the inspiring things about what happened after World War II was watching how the UK responded to that challenge and decided to come up with the NHS. And of course, you can look at socialized medicine any which way that you want. Every single system is going to have its challenges. There's going to be wait lists or delays or bureaucracy, but trying to come up with an effective way so that because I know a person in the Western world right now, even if with insurance, something as simple that could happen to anybody, like appendicitis, could bankrupt you at the wrong
Mm-hmm.
moment. And with a disappearing middle class and economic issues and lots of other struggles going on, that ends up becoming part of the commentary of what happens with today's healthcare. And I think the idea that we're starting to funnel money into different places, start to have different options, that we're coming up with workarounds. That's one, important, but two, that we also have to work on the culture that's creating some of those issues. I see things like teachers posting on social media saying that today's students have a lot of difficulty even writing a 5 sentence essay. And we're at a 6th to 8th grade reading level for 54% of the US population or something like that. And we're going to have an informed electorate to make some important decisions about what we're going to be doing as we start continuing to focus on some of these challenges. And I think it's going to take a lot of existential authenticity from us to be able to attack those things. So there's a lot to talk about there. And I think that we
Yes.
all have something to contribute, whether that's just making different choices. If we're speaking from a place of privilege and we're not currently experiencing any health issues, what do we do to help invest and support into a system that is going to take care of that whole notion of borrowing the world from our next generation? But also for the people who are actively struggling, what kind of resources and tools and platforms are we giving people equal access? Because information is one thing, but the narrative that we choose to attach to information, uh, you were mentioned earlier about truth.
Yeah.
Everything in the universe is either pattern, signal, or noise. It's the
Right.
story you want to tell alongside it. And you can make data tell a lot of different stories. So it's
Correct.
important to try to find a source of information that isn't trying to collapse that into a particular point of view, or if they have an agenda for it to be clear. Because
Mm-hmm.
with less and less critical thinking going on, um, the quality of that fourth estate of journalism to be able to inform what's going on with decision makers. I think this is a kind of a sad time for journalism to shrink, for the Washington Post to be collapsing, for
Yes.
some of these comedian sources that we've been using to supplement our news with a little bit of lack of bias, or maybe even some outright bias, so we can think a little more clearly with it, and seeing things like what's happened to Kimmel and Colbert. And I think there's a lot to learn, and it might really be a fantastic opportunity now for a new platform like Upscrolled or something else even to come out and start trying to give us a different way to have journalistic narratives inform the public that are far less biased, or at least have implicit bias. I think implicit bias is important
Yes.
because if we're going to craft a narrative or have our own position, state it. Then you at least know why the information is being presented the way that it is. This entire shell game of trying to pretend that the way that we're telling stories about information isn't biased and that we're just trying to present the truth,
Yeah.
that starts to become a really bad confounding variable, especially as we lack our investment moving forward into a newer generation that is maybe struggling with some of those critical thinking skills because they have been hit with challenges like so much information. It was just everywhere. And
Yes.
and that doesn't mean it's knowledge. Information has to get changed into knowledge and processed through wisdom, and we have to give people the tools to do that. So we can go any which direction you want to on that, and there's a lot to talk about. I don't know if it's going to fit inside of the span of a single episode, but I'm definitely honored to be here.
Well, you have pretty much wrapped around a lot of what I said in the first segment, which is that it was my own lived experience that created Frank About Health. And by virtue of all the challenges that we are faced with, summarized by you eloquently just now in this segment, this has become a movement that we all have to undertake in our own way. And we just have to find what that niche is based on our own existing resources and the ability to communicate, however that means, by not taking misinformation, by getting everything through the right colleagues, whether they're medical professionals or whether they're medical schools or medical students, or whether they are the books written by some of the guests that I've had on this show, and just be able to go ahead and manifest their own doctrine that they can therefore share with the world. And then we create the community that is fighting for the truth in healthcare. All right, you can tell that we're about to take our second break because it's getting darker this very minute in this room. So let's be back in a few, and we will continue on from here, right here on talkradio.nyc and on our social medias, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitch. We'll be back.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. That QR code was right there for all of you. So if you're watching this after it aired live past 6 p.m., I'm glad that I kept it there as long as possible so that you can all scan the QR code and give us ideas of other individuals that are disruptors in their own lane in healthcare, whatever that might be, mental, physical ailments, trauma survivors, PTSD. The list goes on, because Frank About Health will be able to tell that story as a role model, like I said earlier, but as a way of being able to advocate for newer solutions that maybe people are just not consciously aware of it. One thing I want to just wrap up before we go into our third segment is that most people have probably been raised under the belief that healthcare was something that you only had when you were employed or that you were given based on your privilege in life, whatever that might be. But healthcare is a human need, regardless. Without your health, you can't do anything. So, that being said, when you are seeing that the system is not working, even for those that are in a period of privilege or whatever the circumstances might be, it's up to you, the individual, to come up with a solution. And hopefully, if it works out, it can manifest to the community that you're targeting. That is what I've been fighting for most of the last 15 years. And I've been continuing to work with various colleagues of mine from the academic institutions I've graduated from to be able to rebuild that movement. But it's part and parcel of this particular podcast. The podcast itself is the voice, is the platform, is the amplifier. And people like Anshar know how to take that amplifier and make it exponential, maybe even on a global scale. So, that being said, that's the kind of information when you're looking at any health media sources, look for the truth in the way the stories are presented. If something in your gut doesn't seem right or doesn't feel right, more than likely it is misinformation. And therefore, you double and triple and quadruple check whatever you're reading about, if it's affecting you personally or within your family, or if you are a caregiver, for example. You want to be able to get the right information. I also want all of you out there to consider that while I've had various guests on the show that are disruptors, their books are still selling out there, and they are also coming up with other chapters. There was Mr. Ben Lytle, who was on the show twice in 1980, 1980, where am I? In 2022 and 2024, and he's coming out with his third book of The Potentialist, which has a lot to do with the preview of AI, which is now proliferating around the country, or hell, around the world. And I think his second book was about the wisdom that you've earned in investing in the future. And it's going to be coming out at the end of 2026. And it's something that I definitely will feature here on Frank About Health. But always look to forward thinkers, especially when dealing with healthcare. All right. So, Anshar, overall, it's been interesting to hear about all of these social media things that are going on in the non-Western world. Can I want to have a kind of social discussion with you now about, do you think that part of the disruptions have occurred because the people's perception of America on the global stage has been clouded and people are no longer really even listening because of all the noise that continues to come out each day on various issues that really don't have to do with any one of us. They have to do more with what apparently seems to be the agenda of the executive branch. So, can you give me your own view? I'm looking for your total viewpoint about why we are now looked upon less favorably.
Um, so there was this old fear, put out by George Orwell, that we would have a society where Big Brother was looking over our shoulder, and there would be an invasion of personal liberties. Um, you know, for a long time that was more of a cautionary tale, and I think that one of the defining characteristics as society's evolved since then, um, and I think it more aligns now with all this Huxley's Brave New World, and that we would start caring so much about certain things that we would stop caring about other things. And one of the dynamics that happens in the brain is we do have a limited amount of social valence, and there's a reason for that. If you're in a group of other organisms and you guys split up and you got two packs instead of just one, whatever pack you're in is going to have to care about its own survival a lot more than the next. We have what's called a Dunbar number. How many people are we able to maintain actual relationships with and actually care about? And there's also a kind of object permanence that happens in the brain with regard to social relationships. And you'll see it manifested in people's behavior a lot. You'll see celebrities, they'll go to a third world country, different country, see people going through different challenges, they move into a different community. And they'll all come back and they'll be adopting children and trying to become UN peace and humanitarian ambassadors, and it's a very, very simple dynamic, and that's that people get to reclaim their humanity when they have visibility. And what we care about that happens in our local social group is what's naturally important to us. I don't think a lot of people think about it, but when 9/11 happened, we had less than five figures of people that were directly affected immediately, and then it was on every single news and media channel and part of every political discussion and decision after that for the next year. But during that same period of time, well over six figures of people were dying from issues like Boko Haram in a different country. And because we were so focused about one thing, it causes us to be blind to another. And I think that part of becoming a global community is being able to grant visibility and humanity, not just to other countries for parity, but to understand that we have the luxury of focusing on ourselves with economic pressures, but that the
Yes.
decisions that we make in the West profoundly impact the world. Everything from environmental changes to which subjects of focus and research, how global policies go up, because there's so much pressure via the trade, economics, and other concerns. And I think that to some extent, other players in the world are watching us, kind of like watching a domestic abuse incident happen across a restaurant. There's there's a desire not to get involved, but also there's kind of a caution as that, is that going to break out into this part of the restaurant? But it's affecting the environment for everyone. And I think that if we're going to move into a future where we have a global community, where we
Yes.
start caring about the way that we solve problems with our other global partners, that has to start culturally, all the way down at the very bottom in education. We have to teach our kids to be able to confer with a different group in a different country to solve a problem together, to learn how to iron out their differences or leverage their differences to be able to solve problems together. Um, we also have to be able to invite dialogue. One of the things that'll really strike you if you just pick any talk radio podcast from, I don't know, maybe like say talk radio back in 50s or 60s. You'll listen to people from different walks of life, a vacuum repair salesman and a person who works in the military and a housewife, and they will all sit down and have a discussion about a topic, and often disagreeing about things, but they'll pick and choose the things they agree and disagree on. I like what you said here. I don't really agree on this point, but I really respect that you said this. And the ability to share a space with people that you do not agree with. Aristotle said that one of the signs of a learned mind is the ability to hold two contradictory things in your mind at once, to be able to reason with them. And if you want people to listen to what you have to say, you have to be able to follow their steps to see why they disagree with you. Not because you agree with
Right.
their conclusions, but because you could demonstrate that you have a real understanding of where their conclusion comes from, and that you can respect the fact that, because one thing that we all have in common as human beings is that we're all alive. We've all survived our lives so far.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful place to start. And it's ironic to me that with such a profound thing in common with all other human beings, that because of things like social media, the ability to just hit a red button and to not have to listen to someone else's opinion anymore, rather than having to learn and find harmony with that, it stops us from doing a few basic things. Because yes, toxic ideas can go back and forth, hate can go back and forth, but and I was talking about this on a podcast earlier with Dr. Perry Noppert over at the Octopus Movement, just as a minor mention. But if you
Sure.
find an issue like the death penalty, where people get very divisive, you could sit and argue for an hour and a half and get nowhere on whether or not someone can do something bad enough where they deserve to die. But if you're in a legal system that makes mistakes, then we might have to talk about whether or not it's wrong to kill an innocent person and what happens when you can't take back a punishment. Sometimes being willing to suffer through the dialectic, it can take you to a higher point than the place that you're disagreeing at, because laws, legislation, policies, they're not about promoting our morality. Laws shouldn't be aimed at promoting morality. They should be aimed at the public good. And I would have hoped that we would have learned that from prohibition, because you could go in a room, conservative and liberal, and talk about whether or not alcohol can cause harm. And we could all
Yeah.
agree that it does, but did making it illegal help anyone? And the answer is no, because since that behavior was happening, whether or not it was made legal, the only thing that making it illegal did was create criminals. And when you create criminals, you create crime. You lose the ability to regulate the product. We ended up having moonshine that was making people blind and killing people, and stills
Yeah.
exploding. And there's no authority figure that you can go to when there's a dispute because it's not legal. So now people start shooting each other with Tommy guns. Whether you're talking about a divisive topic like legal prostitution or alcohol or, environmental policies, sometimes when we have to share a social space with other people, you have to make the consideration of how laws serve to benefit the society, and recognize that laws are not about enforcing morality or viewpoints, but it's about what works. And I think
Right.
that one of the things that the West is getting wrong right now is that
Yes.
because people have become so divisive about their belief systems, that they believe that the only way to be able to stand behind their belief systems is to try to put it into law. And that can create so much chaos and destructive power, when really our aim should be at helping people and making the world a better place. And I think that when we don't have that aim, it's because of the fact that we are losing the ability to think critically. That,
Yes.
it's not about whether your neighbor is right or you are. It's about the fact that you have to live in a neighborhood together.
Yeah.
And it's something that people are losing touch with. And when I see so much happening in the world that could be cured by that, so that we could really start to focus in on the problems that actually matter, that are plaguing us,
Yes.
um, it it is cognitive dissonance in action, in my opinion, since you asked for it.
I mean, this is a perfect segue into our next break, because the one person that I want to talk about, Matthew Zachary, is looking at the cognitive dissonance that's going on in our country and treating healthcare as the political narrative that it has become, because of trying to intertwine that gap that's been created because of the cognitive dissonance, because of social media, because of people already trying to prove that their view is correct and your view is wrong. And yet they're losing their humanity and therefore not even concerned about healthcare. Healthcare to them, if they're already healthy, it's like worried about going to a good restaurant. They don't have the same type of nuance, especially in the part of the world where chronic illness is a way of life. And I think that divide in itself is something that I look forward to sharing in the final segment of the show, where Matthew Zachary is trying to bridge that gap. However, based on everything that you said, I gather the reason why that the United States might be looked on kind of negatively now is because all the viewpoints at the top are skewed and scattered and not even focused on any level. That you could be talking about healthcare, or you could be talking about immigration, or you could be talking about something else, and it has the same resonance. There's no sense of priority, no sense of despair. It's just chaos. And when you have that dull narrative, anything can fall apart. And I don't know. People would probably bet, oh, I see I went over because you said a lot of profound things. That all being said, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few. On Frank About Health, we're not just talking healthcare. We're managing disruption and innovation. Over the last 4 years, I've taken you from epilepsy and COVID to mental health, caregiving, and now the front lines of healthcare transformation. Stay tuned for a healthier future as we bring on the innovators, professionals, storytellers, and advocates who show you how to own your healthcare every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody. I am welcoming you back to the final segment of this show on healthy media, but I am still keeping up the card for you to scan and pre-order this book, We the Patients. It is going to be released in March, and a follow-up concert will be played at Lincoln Center to raise funding for cancer research, as well as cancer cures and all the stuff that had been defunded by the big, beautiful bill. Matthew Zachary is a fighter, an advocate. He has the longest running healthcare podcast since 2007, available audio only in most cases, which is why he appeared on Frank About Health back in December before the holiday break, because he wanted to expose all of his upcoming activities. He is also working on developing a political action committee that will help block votership, that will do nothing but destroy our existing healthcare system, even though it already has been tainted in my view. Now, that being said, I recommend this book highly. I haven't gotten my copy yet, but if you use the QR code right there on your phone or any other device, it will be available for pre-order and released to you by March. All right, that all being said, I think everything that you said, Anshar, in the third segment, he probably represents the voice that can help bridge that gap and that cognitive dissonance that has amassed, especially over the last 6 months, if not the entire year 2025.
I'm not familiar, but I'd be more than willing to take a look. Yeah.
Oh no, I mean he actually when I first met him, I was introduced by Tom, our friend Tom, and I had no idea that he was going to be meeting with me about his stuff. I just knew that he was going to be a great guest, an example of a disruptor for Frank About Health. But when he told me his story, I was like, how can I help? I mean, it became more of like, well, besides being on the show, how can I help you with your concert? And that I've been working on something with Fordham, which is right at Lincoln Center, where hopefully we'll be able to merge those things together. But that's all a matter of timing and other kinds of priorities that have to happen. The thing that I am pretty much trying to say is that he represents the prototype or the example of when you are faced with your life, your mortality, and there's no cure out there, no solution. This is like 25 years ago. They didn't have AI. They didn't have social media. They didn't have the cures for cancer they have
Well,
today.
there's stuff to discuss there. I mean, we've been struggling with existential nihilism for a long time, ever since Soren Abbey Kierkegaard started talking about existential ideas. I think one of the most informative things you can do is to read Albert Camus' narrative on Sisyphus. This idea that, if we are just pushing this boulder up and this is human existence, how do we make that existence meaningful? I think that meaning, and how we choose to approach that is a key part of human existence. But I did want a little bit of an opportunity to talk about some of the things that I'm doing personally just in the next month or so, just because it's time limited. I do have a custom GPT that I made for the public. It's completely free, called Ask Anshar. And it's the name kind of came from all of my friends. Constantly, my name in people's phones used to be Google, so now it's After a while, it was Anshar GPT, and then it was Ask Anshar. So I decided to name it that. But I was trying to kind of be that person that I was missing. And when I was younger and struggling with all those social challenges with ASD, I always found people's behavior very confusing. So the whole purpose of that custom GPT and how I have it set up is so that people can use it as a resource to help understand confusing behavior. So that's a
Yes.
neurodivergent resource, but also something that all people can get into. If you're curious why, when someone finds you attractive or they find you creepy, they're going to look away in either case,
Hmm.
or whether or not someone's being sarcastic in an email or something like that. It's actually not only programmed to do that specifically, um, but it's also designed to be able to take input from neurodivergent thinkers. So if you communicate with stream of consciousness, if maybe your prosody or the way that you put together words, has a little bit of something different about it. It's designed specifically to not care about those idiosyncrasies. I also tried to bake in some value for neurotypical folks too. Kind of
Hmm.
I kind of modeled it after what we used to do with the 90s infomercial. A lot of those great products that we fondly remember on made for TV were there. They were offered with value for neurotypical people, but really they serve disabled people. The person who benefits most from the little cart carrier that lets you carry in 4 gallons of milk is probably the person with one arm. So um, but you have to be able to let people socially share that and get other value out of it. So to that end, I went through I think over 200 research DOIs on social media dating, um, like dating and dating profiles, and it actually has a dating profile analyzer on it too. If you're interested to get insights about a person's personality, what does it mean that a person chose this particular photo or decided to write these things on their profile? Get insights about them, maybe some leading questions you can ask them. um, One of the things that's happening right now in our society, because we do not have open spaces for a lot of these conversations, is people
Hmm.
are spending a lot of their time talking to LLM. And while that can be a good thing, it can also be a very bad thing because the way that
It's not a
LLM is
human being.
designed,
Hmm.
it takes your prior context and kind of proprioceptively moves it forward. And that can lead to siloed thinking. It can lead to confirmation bias. It can lead to lack of epistemic humility. Whether or not you're using a particular model or a different one, that could be a big confounding variable in how you get results from LLM. And so, to that end, I'm doing a little experiment here. This coming Saturday, I actually have an event. I'm going to be teaching a workshop on
Hmm.
how to use neurolinguistic programming to
Mm.
get better results out of LLM, to stop things like LLM psychosis, have more epistemic honesty with the conclusions and things that you get out of it, how to effectively design your own custom GPT, how to leverage things like the use of GitHub repositories with a tool like Codex, for example, to be able to do document generation. I think if we're all sick at a certain point of trying to copy and paste things or have a model like GPT trying to cycle through making PDFs for us and things don't line up. So I'll be showing how to do those things in a nice deterministic way that you can actually trust, with even reasoning that you can work out with a pen and paper to know that it's being honest with you. So
Yes.
there'll be lots of cool things there. One of the things I like to do with workshops is I like to do a quick little interview with each of the people that are in the class and find out what their goals are, so to make sure that they actually get value out of the class and it's not a waste of their time. So if you're interested in that, I have that posted on my LinkedIn. And then I also
Excellent.
have a really exciting opportunity coming up next month. I'm actually going to be speaking at Yale on
Yes.
the power of thinking differently,
Yeah.
how the different ways developmentally we change our cognition, how to identify blind spots in your cognition and leverage your strengths. Because if you can figure out the ways that you're worst at reasoning, you can actually use the ways that you're best at reasoning to circumvent those challenges.
Yes.
And really, there's a ton of other stuff going on too, but it's probably far too much for me to be able to fit into a couple of minutes. But I will give you the my electronic business card link. But it's very, very easy to find me online. There's pretty much nobody else with my name in this combination. So if you look for me in
Yes.
quotes, you will find me. And I do encourage you to take a look at that content. Not because I'm selling something, just because I think that people will get value out of it. I'm not really a monetarily driven person. I'm a value driven person. And I think that there's a lot of things that we have to learn about how we reason. And
Yes.
one of the things I lecture on a lot is cognitive biases, cognitive
Mhm.
distortions, how
Yes.
our belief systems and the narratives that we tell ourselves can affect our behavior, and then also how to identify those patterns in other people. There's a great quote from Jonathan Swift from way back when: you can't reason another person out of a decision that they didn't use reason to get into. If a
Correct.
person is going through an emotional experience and it's causing them to change their behavior, you have to hit them where they live and show them that you understand them first. You have to show them that you understand their problem first. You
Yes.
find a place of mutual empathy before you can try to just jump into problem solving. And that used to be a big challenge for me with my ASD because I was a very solution oriented thinker. I wouldn't know that people were looking for empathy. I think that we all have lots of things to learn about people. One of the things that I thought that I ended up turning into an advantage is not having anything in my cup. I didn't have any bad habits because I didn't have any habits. So I got to pick what my habits were. And
Yes.
I try to teach other people how to do that same thing, how to connect to their audiences. And that's something that I think that we need today is the ability to open up dialogue, to have a reverse debate, to
Yes.
intentionally invite someone who has an adversarial position, and
Yes.
first and foremost, take the time to listen to what they have to say and see if you can switch positions with that person. See if you can explain that argument
Absolutely.
back to them to make sure that they agree with you so you really do understand where they are. And I know that there's a lot of pop psychology that goes into the social media space, but if you are really genuinely concerned about people gaslighting you or, narcissists or whatever, one of the greatest things that you can do, if you're not to the point where you already know that they're toxic and you need a gray rock to get away, is if you actually follow with them through the steps of where they're going and make sure that they acknowledge that first, they don't have the ability to just say, just kidding, after. You've actually mirrored their entire reasoning and let them paint themselves all the way into a corner so that their position is explicit before you
Yes.
respond to it. And that's part of good listening, but also good boundaries and being able to defend yourself. In fact, setting boundaries is one of the things I think that a lot of people struggle with. There's lots of different things to learn. So um,
Yes.
I find that very inspiring. I think that every single growth that I've had in my life has been fueled by failure. And I
Yes.
find a lot of irony in platforms like LinkedIn, where it's just this movie facade of everyone's best version of themselves with no failure. And failure is powerful. Failure is informative. And I feel that one of the things that we need to teach kids, because when we move them into the phase of adulthood, is we change this whole way that we look at failure and shame and how we process it because we use it to sell them products.
Yes.
Buy the cream so you don't have zits. Buy this, do this so people don't see you a certain way. Buy the bag. And the problem with having a culture that saturates us like that is that we start to have a terrible fear of failure. We even have a memory system that makes us remember our negative experiences more than our positive and gives us all imposter syndrome. There are some
Yes.
very simple ways to change the way that you live your life that can make you a lot happier. And it's not
Yes.
some, spiritual system or anything. It's just understanding how things work and then making your best choices to navigate around that.
We have been told to end. So basically, everyone, you have heard from the master about what makes healthy media as a movement. It's communication, it's using your brain, it's looking for the right information from the right people, the right sources. There is cognitive bias and there is AI, but you have to keep hold of your own focus and use that. Healthy Media is not just a company that I've created where I have this podcast, I have my documentary, I've been promoting other people's content. Matthew Zachary's concert is in April, as well as his book is on sale now. But more importantly, aside from Anshar's upcoming Yale event and all of the other things that I have been working on with Fordham Gabelli School of Business, I am telling you right now, to have healthy media in your life is to be focused on what your health needs are, find the right resources to get the answers you're looking for, and then simultaneously continue watching Frank About Health every week. All right, that all being said, Anshar, thank you for being here. Thank you again behind the scenes, Jesse, for engineering the show, as well as thank you again to Sam Leibowitz for talkradio.nyc and
Thanks for
the
having me.
ecosystem. Well, oh, you're very welcome. And remember, the reason why that I'm talking about healthcare is because it's lived experience that I've now manifested into a movement that everyone needs to be part of in order to get the right information about your healthcare. All right, everybody, signing off right now. Thanks for being here. Speak to you next week.